My name is Daniel, and for a long time, I believed my life was unfolding exactly as it should. I had a stable job as a project manager, a tight-knit group of friends, and I was deeply, hopelessly in love with a woman named Chloe. We had been inseparable for 5 wonderful years. When my grandmother, my last living relative, passed away, she left me her most treasured possession, a charming, slightly worn 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of the city. It was the house I'd spent my childhood in, filled with the scent of old books and the echoes of my family's laughter. It was my sanctuary, my anchor. Chloe and I made the decision to move in together, dreaming of turning it into our own family home, filling it with new memories. I was on top of the world, convinced this was the beautiful beginning of our forever. The first crack in my perfect world appeared during a routine meeting with the lawyer to finalize the inheritance. He was an older, serious man named Mr. Higgins, with thick glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. Daniel, as the sole beneficiary, the house is unequivocally yours, he stated, adjusting his glasses. Then his gaze shifted to Chloe, who was sitting beside me, her hand clasping mine tightly. If you two are as serious as you appear, you might consider adding her to the title. It can simplify matters greatly in the future, for things like mortgages or, well, should anything happen. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This was my grandmother's house, a tangible piece of my history. But Chloe turned to me, her eyes wide and sincere. It's just a piece of paper, Danny, she whispered softly. It shows you're all in for us, for our future together. I loved her more than anything. I wanted to prove my commitment was absolute. So, against the quiet warning in my gut, I nodded and agreed. For the next 2 years, our life in the house was everything I had dreamed it would be. We spent weekends painting the rooms in colors we chose together. We turned the neglected backyard into a thriving vegetable garden, and we hosted countless friends for loud, joyful barbecues on the patio. The house felt alive and vibrant, filled with a new generation of laughter. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Chloe began to change. She became distant, spending more and more nights working late or having drinks with the girls. She started to criticize the house, calling its character quaint and its style hopelessly outdated. I dismissed it as stress from her new job. Then, one cold, rainy Tuesday evening, she sat me down at our kitchen table, the same one my grandmother had owned. Daniel, I love you, but I need to find myself, she said, her eyes fixed on her hands. This life, this domestic routine, it's suffocating me. It's not for me anymore. I felt the floor drop out from under me. The future we had meticulously planned together vanished into thin air in a matter of seconds. The breakup was a messy, painful affair, stretching out over several tense weeks. She moved her things out a week after that conversation, taking her favorite art and half the living room furniture, leaving empty, haunting spaces behind. The house felt cavernous and eerily silent without her constant presence. But it was still my home, my legal responsibility. Because both our names were on the deed, I knew I had to maintain it. I continued paying the entire mortgage, all the utility bills, and for all the necessary upkeep, from lawn care to repairing a leaky faucet. I figured we'd eventually get around to sorting out the legal details. Perhaps I'd slowly save up to buy her out. For the time being, I just needed to heal. I threw myself into my work and tried to rebuild a solitary life within those familiar walls, clinging to the comfort of my childhood memories like a life raft. 6 long months after our split, a formal, crisp letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I tore the envelope open. The words inside were cold, stark, and utterly devastating. It informed me, in the most clinical language possible, that Chloe had been involved in a serious car accident. She had not survived. I sank to the floor in my hallway, the paper fluttering from my grasp. The grief that washed over me was a confusing, turbulent storm. It was the profound pain of losing someone I had once loved so deeply, mixed with the bitter anguish of our painfully unfinished story. I mourned the vibrant, loving woman she had been, and I grieved for the future we were never destined to have. It was a profoundly dark and lonely time, the silence of the house now feeling heavy and oppressive. A month after the small, somber funeral, another legal letter arrived. This one was personally signed by Chloe's mother, Patricia. She had never approved of me, always making it clear she believed her daughter could have done much better. Her letter was even colder and more impersonal than the first. It stated, with brutal efficiency, that since Chloe was a legal co-owner of the house at the time of her death, her 50% share of the property now legally passed to her next of kin, her mother. She was formally giving me 30 days to vacate my home. I felt the world tilt on its axis. This couldn't be happening. My own home, my grandmother's precious legacy, was being coldly stolen from me by a woman who had always looked at me with disdain. A wave of nausea and powerless rage swept over me. I immediately hired a lawyer, a compassionate but brutally straightforward man named Mr. Evans. He was kind, but he didn't sugarcoat things. After reviewing all the documents, his face was grim. "Daniel, I'm so sorry," he said, leaning forward on his desk. "But because her name was legally on the deed, the law is painfully clear. Her share is an asset of her estate. Her mother is the sole heir." He laid out my two heartbreaking options. I could try to buy Patricia out, but I didn't have anywhere near the savings to pay half the house's current market value. Or we could petition the court to force a sale of the house, and I would receive half the proceeds. Both options meant irrevocably losing my home. I felt completely powerless, betrayed by a legal system I had always believed would protect people, and devastated by a decision made out of love. The following weeks descended into a relentless nightmare. Patricia refused to speak to me directly. All communication funneled through her aggressive lawyer. She rejected every single offer I made, including a long-term payment plan that would have stretched my finances to the limit. It became clear she didn't want the money. She wanted me out. She wanted to erase me from the story of this house completely. The stress was unbearable. I stopped sleeping, my appetite vanished, and the walls of my beloved home began to feel like a prison. I was about to lose the last physical connection to my family because of a decision I made when I was blind with love. The sheer injustice of it burned like acid inside me. I began the agonizing process of packing my things, each box I sealed feeling like I was boxing up a piece of my own soul. The feeling of loss was a physical, crushing weight on my chest. The day I finally had to move out was, without a doubt, the worst day of my life. I loaded the last cardboard box into my cramped car and took one last, long look at the house, memorizing the way the morning sun hit the front porch. As I sat there in the driver's seat, paralyzed with grief, Patricia's car pulled up. She emerged with a sharply dressed real estate agent in tow. They didn't even have the decency to wait for me to leave. I watched her point at the roof, then at my grandmother's prized rose bushes. A smug, satisfied look on her face as the agent nodded and typed notes into his phone. She was going to sell my home and keep every single penny for herself. I started my car and drove away, tears of rage and sorrow streaming down my face, my home disappearing from the rearview mirror. I felt a profound, hollowing sense of failure. I moved into a small, sterile, beige apartment on the other side of town. The boxes from my old life were stacked haphazardly to the ceiling, a constant, mocking reminder of everything I had lost. The anger and grief became my constant, unwelcome companions. I went through the motions of life, work, groceries, sleep, but I felt hollowed out, a ghost of my former self. My friends tried to cheer me up, taking me out for drinks, but their well-meaning pity just made the feeling worse. How could I have been so naive? I had willingly handed over half of my most valuable possession on a promise, and it had cost me everything. I was stuck in a deep, dark hole, with no idea how to claw my way out and move forward. A full, bleak year passed. The sharp, stabbing pain had eventually faded into a dull, constant ache that resided deep in my bones. One overcast weekend, I decided I finally had to confront the last of the boxes from the house, the ones marked Grandma's stuff. I was going through a box of her old books, mostly dusty classics, deciding what to keep or donate, when I found her old, leather-bound Bible. It was worn soft at the edges and smelled faintly of vanilla and thyme. As I carefully flipped through the fragile, thin pages, A folded, yellowed piece of paper, brittle with age, fell out and fluttered silently to the floor. I almost tossed it into the recycling bag, thinking it was just an old bookmark or a faded prayer. But some instinct, some faint whisper of intuition, made me pick it up and smooth it open on my lap. The document was formally titled Grant Deed, and was much, much older than the simple document I had signed with Mr. Higgins. This was the original title to the house and the full acre of land it was built on, from when my grandfather had first purchased it over 50 years ago. My eyes struggled to scan the dense, complicated legal language, filled with heretofores and parties of the first part. It was difficult to understand, but one specific phrase near the bottom kept repeating, jumping out at me, life estate. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded important. My heart started to beat a little faster, a tiny drum of hope in the quiet apartment. Why had my grandmother kept this hidden away? I carefully, reverently, placed the ancient document into a clean folder, a tiny, fragile spark of hope igniting in my chest for the first time in over a year. The next morning, I practically ran to Mr. Evans's office, the folder clutched tightly in my hand. He read the old deed slowly and carefully, his eyebrows rising higher and higher with each passing second. "Daniel," he finally said, looking up at me with unvarnished excitement. "This changes everything. This changes everything." He then launched into an explanation of a life estate, a special and powerful legal rule. It meant that while my grandmother had willed the house to me, the actual full ownership was held in a trust. I had the right to live in the house for my entire life. I was the life tenant. But I never truly had the full bundle of ownership rights. I did not have the right to sell it or, most critically, to give away any part of it to someone else. When you added Chloe to the title, Mr. Evans continued, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, you were attempting to transfer a property interest you never legally possessed in the first place. It was an invalid act. A complete nullity. The words sunk in slowly, then all at once, like a dam breaking. Chloe's name on the deed was meaningless, a phantom on a worthless document. The house was never, ever part of her estate, which meant her mother had absolutely no legal claim to it whatsoever. The relief that washed over me was so powerful and overwhelming that I felt dizzy, leaning forward in my chair. My grandfather's incredible foresight, a decision made decades ago, had silently protected my home when I had been too naive to protect it myself. We immediately filed a quiet title action with the court. This was a specific legal process designed to officially establish me as the sole rightful owner and to clear the fraudulent claim from the property record once and for all. We had to formally serve the court papers to Patricia and her lawyer. I knew a fierce, ugly fight was coming. Patricia had already mentally spent the money from the sale of my house. She would not give up without a vicious battle. The waiting period for the court date was agonizing. But this time, I was filled with a fierce, determined hope instead of the crushing weight of despair. I was fighting back. As expected, Patricia fought back with a venomous fury. Her lawyer filed motion after motion, trying to get the case thrown out on technicalities. They argued that I had clearly intended to give Chloe the house, that the new deed superseded the old one, that I was acting in bad faith. But their arguments were weak and emotional, shattering against the ironclad, unemotional language of the original life estate. Mr. Evans was a rock, a calm and brilliant strategist, methodically countering every one of their claims with solid legal precedent and cold, hard facts. Each small victory in court, a denied motion, an overruled objection, felt like another step closer to reclaiming my past and securing my future. The day of the final hearing arrived. I put on my best, most confident suit and walked into the cavernous courtroom with Mr. Evans by my side. Patricia was there, seated at the opposite table, and she shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The judge, a stern-looking woman with intelligent eyes, listened patiently to both sides. She asked Patricia's lawyer a series of sharp, pointed questions that he stumbled over and struggled to answer coherently. Then she carefully reviewed the original deed herself. After what felt like an eternity of tense silence, she spoke. "The original life estate is valid and legally binding," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. The subsequent deed is therefore void. The property is restored solely to the life tenant, Daniel Price. I had won. The finality of the gavel slamming down was the most beautiful, resonant sound I'd ever heard. Patricia stood up so fast her chair screeched violently against the floor, and she stormed out of the courtroom without a single backward glance, her lawyer scrambling after her. Mr. Evans turned and shook my hand firmly, beaming with pride. It's over, Daniel. This is officially your house. Go home. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling a colossal weight lift from my shoulders. A weight I had carried for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The law, which I had felt had failed me so profoundly, had actually been my silent salvation all along. I just hadn't known where to look. A week later, I received the official stamped court order in the mail. I took the thick envelope, got in my car, and drove straight to my house. My house. My heart sank for a moment as I saw it. A bright, plastic for sale sign staked arrogantly into my front lawn. A surge of righteous anger flooded through me. I marched up to it, grabbed the wooden post with both hands, and with a mighty, grunting pull, I yanked it out of the ground. I snapped it over my knee with a satisfying crack and tossed the two pieces into the garbage can on the curb. It was a powerfully symbolic gesture, and it felt incredible. I was physically taking back what was mine. I used my new key, the one the court had ordered Patricia to provide, to unlock the front door. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of dust and abandonment. It was empty, but it was undeniably legally mine. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. I remembered my grandmother humming in the kitchen, my grandfather reading his newspaper in the living room chair, and yes, even the good, early times with Chloe. But those memories no longer had a painful power over me. They were just chapters in this house's long story. This house was my sanctuary again, my fortress. I stood in the center of the living room and made a promise to myself to never, ever take it for granted again. The first practical thing I did was call a locksmith to change all the locks, a final, physical act of reclaiming my space and my security. Then, I started the slow, deliberate process of moving back in. This time, it felt profoundly different. I wasn't just moving furniture. I was thoughtfully rebuilding my life on my own terms, by my own rules. Friends came over to help, and we celebrated with pizza and beer, sitting on the floor of the empty living room, our laughter echoing off the bare walls. The sound was genuine and free, a sound of new beginnings, of hard-won peace, and of a future I had fought for and won. About a month after I had settled back in, I received a tersely worded letter from Patricia's lawyer. It was a formal request to collect some alleged personal items of Chloe's that she claimed were still stored in the attic. I allowed it, but only under my direct supervision. When Patricia came, she refused to even look in my direction, her back stiff with pride and bitterness. She was a broken, hollowed-out woman, her greed having cost her nothing but her own dignity and any chance of peace. I didn't feel triumphant anymore, watching her. I just felt a distant, calm sense of pity. She collected a small box of old yearbooks and left without a word. Karma, I realized, wasn't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, absolute, and perfectly just. I decided it was time to make some changes to the house, to imprint my own identity upon it. I painted the walls in new, bright, optimistic colors that I chose alone. I saved up and renovated the kitchen, not because Chloe had thought it was outdated, but because I wanted a modern, functional space for myself. With every brushstroke and every new fixture I installed, I was layering my own new story over the past, actively healing the wounds that had been left behind. The house was no longer just a relic of my past or a monument to my loss. It was being transformed into the solid foundation of my future, a future I was now excited to build. I sometimes still take out that original deed, now safely preserved in a protective sleeve, and look at it. I keep it tucked in my grandmother's Bible right where I found it. My grandfather was a smart, prudent man. He probably never could have imagined it would be used one day to save the house from a situation as dramatic and painful as mine. He He had simply wanted to protect his family's legacy for generations to come. I am forever, eternally grateful for his wisdom and his foresight. That simple, fragile piece of paper, hidden away for decades, was ultimately more powerful than any broken promise or act of betrayal. It was the silent, waiting truth, and it had found me just when I needed it most. Now, my life is finally peaceful, filled with a contentment I thought I'd lost forever. The house is once again filled with light, music, and the new memories I am creating. I've started a new relationship with a wonderful woman who appreciates the deep history of my home and loves me for who I am, not for what I can give her. I learned a brutally hard lesson about trust, love, and the letter of the law, but going through that fire ultimately made me stronger, wiser, and more resilient. They tried to take my home, but they only succeeded in showing me how unbreakable my family's love truly was. A love that spanned generations to protect me. My ex inherited what she thought was my home, but I got it back when she least expected. A powerful testament that what is truly and rightfully yours will always find its way back to you.